So, I've been learning Python recently for some work, and of course, you start with how you declare variables and other mundane stuff. But I think uh, something worth paying more attention to are functions that we need to learn. So, in this in this stream, we will be focusing on functions solely. And let's start with declaration of functions. So standard functions can be declared with def keyword followed by name of the function and followed by usual parenthesis, which encapsulates the parameters, and it's followed by a semicolon. Sorry, it's a colon, not a semicolon. So it's followed by a colon, and obviously we don't have any types here since I'm not using any type hints, so we're not going to get any return type here, or we don't specify any type here. So also notice that there are no brackets here, so what you would normally use is indentation to replace the body of the function. So normally when you define a function in any other language, let's say JavaScript, you would write it like this: function greeting, and this body, this pair of curly braces, is the place where you will write all your logic, the logic that belongs to this function greeting. However, in Python, since we do not have those things, we usually, those curly braces, I mean, so we have to rely on indentation to mark the beginning and end of the functions. So let's say we want to, let's take a parameter here. So message, again, we do not define, or we do not specify any type. We will just pass a parameter named message to greeting function, and then we'll just print it, and we'll print message. We don't need to use semicolons here too. So as you can see, we have defined our first Python function, which takes a parameter named message, and it just prints that message to the terminal. So we can call this function like we call any other function, but the most important thing to notice is that you just cannot call it from here. You have to maintain this indentation. If the body of your function started from this line, or after a tab character, since it's a tab character, you can see the body of your function starts and ends here. So to get out of this function, we have to go back. We have to go back one tab chars to the start of the line. We end up here, and then we can call this function like we would call any other function in any other language, passing an argument. And if you try to run this function now, you can see the results, and we can say functions, where are we? I'm in the wrong directory. Okay, dev should have copied. Copy path. Okay. Now we can run Python and we can pass the name of the file or module. And as you can see, it prints hello. So this is the bare bones function in Python. There is one interesting thing about this function. Let's say, as we described earlier, like we have a function in JavaScript like this, function X. We can have a function with an empty body. Like sometimes we do have some functions with an empty body. Like we just declare the function, we don't know what to do in that function yet. So we can have a function with an empty body. So how would you represent this function in Python, since we do not have any closing brackets, in closing brackets? How would you represent this function? So in Python, what we can do is we can define a function with an empty body with a special keyword called pass. Let's say we have a def function with empty body. Okay, I'm in the habit of typing the curly braces because I mostly program in those languages, so it's just a habit you have to overcome when you're dealing with Python. So this is our function. We write pass here and that's it. If you remove pass, then it's an error. It should be an error if we try to call this function because its body is not complete. It's an incomplete function declaration, so we have to write pass here. Only then we can run this successfully. Let's remove it and just try to run this code. Let's see what happens. You see, this function is not, it's incomplete, so you get this error. Expected an indented block after function definition. Okay, so this is the problem. We have to write something here to complete this function, and we can write pass. We can also write this ellipsis. This has a special meaning in Python. We will see that in class, but right now we can either write pass or ellipsis. Both will work. Now this function is complete and we shouldn't get any error, and we can call this function from here. Of course it won't do anything because we haven't written any code inside it yet. So you see, we don't get anything from this function. So this is how we declare functions in Python with def keyword. And also notice the naming convention here. We mostly use snake case to write function names, unlike I'm used to Java, C# and Kotlin. So I'm used to camel case function names mostly, but in Python we use snake case, and I think it's good to follow the conventions that that the language specifies. So this is how we declare functions in Python. So what about the concept of overloading? See, we have a function, we have a parameter, and we can do things we want to do in the function. What if our greeting function took 2 messages? Let's say we have another greeting function which takes 2 messages. Let's say message 1, message 2. Okay, now let's see. The problem here is, again, we haven't defined the body. Print message 1, message 2. Am I making any mistake here? What's this? Okay, so it's just screaming out here that there is no function overloading happening here. Since we don't have types already, and we know that in function overloading, let's first understand what function overloading is. From our knowledge of function overloading, the name of the function, to overload a function, we should have two functions that have same name but different types or different order of parameters. So let's try to see it through Kotlin. I'm more used to Kotlin, so I would write some Kotlin functions here just to demonstrate my point. Let's see, we have fun add. Let's say it's a Kotlin function, by the way, so it's just, I will use the Kotlin syntax here. A int, B int. So we can have another add function that takes not just two parameters but three parameters. So obviously we can do that in Kotlin because it supports function overloading or method overloading. Int B, int C, int. As you can see, we have two functions here that have same name and share same types of parameters, yes, but different number of parameters. We have same types. These two parameters have same types, but there is different number of parameters here. This one has two parameters and this one has three parameters. So when we call this function add, passing two arguments, the compiler in the interpreter in the JVM runtime, whatever that runs the code, actually knows it knows that we have to run this function because we have only two integer arguments, and it matches this, it resolves to this function. But if we passed another argument, let's say 4, now the runtime knows that the JVM runtime knows that we have to target this function, or this call will resolve to this function, which takes in three arguments and all of them are integer. So we can also have an add function that takes two parameter. So here the overloading is because of like the number of arguments are varying in these two calls. We can safely say that this is one overload and this is second overload, and they differ in just the number of arguments. They have same name but different number of arguments or parameters. So we can also have another add function with exactly two arguments, but we can change the type of one of these arguments, and that function will still be a valid overloaded function. Let's see, a int b float. All types are classes in Python, so in Kotlin not. Even in Python, I said it accidentally, but even in Python all types are classes. So but here we are talking about Kotlin. All this thing belongs to Kotlin. So now we have another function, add function, with two arguments just like we had here, but now the difference is not the number of parameters but type of parameters. If we call add but passing 2 and 3.4, then we know that which function will be called? This function will be called. We know, like, from the type of arguments, we know that if we are passing 3.4, which is a floating point number, this function should be called, not this one. So the JVM runtime can actually resolve which function it needs to call based on the call and the arguments we passed in the call. So this is how the overloading thing works. So we can safely comment it now, and let's come back to Python. So in Python, it's not possible to overload a function because it just doesn't support overloading. So you can see this warning here. It's not an error. Greeting is obscured by a declaration of the same name. So what we have done is we have declared two greeting functions, one at the top and one at the bottom. We have declared two greeting functions and both of them have basically the same name. They only differ in number of parameters. But the problem is, since Python does not support overloading, what happens is now our interpreter does not see this function. It's obscured, it's hidden or shadowed. Now only the last defined function will be used. So in our code, if we assume, and if from our knowledge we know that the code runs from top to bottom, so what happens here is when the interpreter sees this line, it knows that there is only one greeting function that's defined on line 30. It forgets about the greeting function defined on line 1. So now we know that only this function will be called. Others, any greeting function that we defined prior to line 30 will be ignored. So if we try to run this, okay, we have missed this colon here. It's a valid Python code, so there shouldn't be any error. It's just a warning. So what happens is now we cannot call greeting function if we wanted to call it with one argument. Since our last greeting takes two arguments, let's see if we call it with just one argument, and both are required arguments because we haven't supplied any value to these one of these arguments or either of these arguments. So we have to basically call it with the same number of arguments or same number of arguments as there are parameters. So let's try to call it. See, we are getting an error that a greeting missing one required positional argument message 2. So it's clearly saying that we haven't passed an argument for the parameter named message 2. So it's very clear what we have missed. If we pass another argument here, our problem will be solved and there won't be any issue anymore. So we know from this little experiment that Python does not support function overloading. I think JavaScript too does not support function overloading, and it's same as JavaScript. We don't have any function overloading here. So you cannot write a function with same name twice or more than 2 times as we can in, say, in languages like Java, C#, Kotlin and others. We can't do that here. Even in C we can obviously overload functions, if I'm not wrong. Okay, so this is the behavior, and this is how we define functions with def keyword followed by name of function, and we usually use snake case to define functions, and this is how functions are defined in Python. And we can return something from Python functions if we want. Let's say we define a simple add function in Python. We can return anything we like. Let's return the result of A and B, or sum of A and B. So now we can call this add function with any 2 arguments, and we will receive a result. So we can print that result calling print function. It should work. Here it is. So this is how basic Python functions are declared and used. Remember that we don't have any overloading, so if you want to, in case you want to pass any number of arguments to a function, or you want to have some kind of overloaded syntax, uh, then what options do you have? Well, one simple option is to use this default argument or uh, default values in parameters. I forgot the name of this concept. I think it's default arguments or default values in parameters. You can use this default value in parameter. Since we have assigned an empty string to this message2 parameter now, what we can do is we can call greeting with either one argument or two arguments. If we call it with one argument, the first argument will be assigned to message1 and message2 will be empty string by default because we have already assigned empty string. If we call it with two arguments, we get the usual print of first message and the second message. Let's just see this for a simple use case. If we call greeting now, and if we pass one argument, see now there is no warning here. We can easily pass one argument, let's say, and we are not passing the second argument here. So if we try to call this, we get hello again, and we can see we don't need to call it twice. We can see that we are calling same greeting with two arguments here, and we are calling greeting with one argument here. So now this behaves like an overloaded function. Obviously it's not function overloading, but it kind of behaves like an overloaded function. So this is the beginning of our Python journey in, and basically today we discussed a little about how we declare functions and whether we can return something from functions or not, or whether there is the concept of function overloading available in Python or not. So this is it for now. In next session we will discuss more about functions and we'll build upon that. So for now, goodbye.